Welcome, everyone. My name is David Sandu. I'm really excited to introduce to you Generosity Conversations. I'm really excited for the conversation for today and for the conversations that we'll have together. So, I just want to start by talking about the scripture that's made a huge impact on my life. It's from 1 Timothy 6:17 through 19. It says, "Command those who are rich in this present world," which I feel like everyone in the U.S. is qualifies for that, not to be arrogant or to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. Again, that's from 1 Timothy 6:17 through 19. Really impactful for me in my life. So who is Generous Giving? So Generous Giving is a nonprofit foundation. It was founded in 2000 by the McClellan Foundation. Their focus, the whole focus of Generous Giving, is to share the message of biblical generosity, to create opportunities and conversations like we're having today about what it means to be more generous, what it means to have greater joy in your giving, and to draw closer to Christ through your generosity. They're fully and privately funded, so they don't ask for money or anything, and they're really just all about creating that safe space for people to talk about money in a Christ-centered forum. David, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I've been working with generous giving for a couple of years now, and I found it very impactful to go through things like this, and it inspired me to facilitate discussions with others as well. So it's had a huge impact on my life, and I know hundreds, maybe thousands of others.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, cool. So about David, well, the benefit to this is my name's David, and we have David Clinton on the phone, who is a giving coach. And so I'll just share a little bit about myself. My name is David Sandu. I'm a financial advisor at Wise Wealth. I've been practicing now for a little over 5 years. I was a rocket scientist before, and I transitioned to financial planning, mainly because I learned about biblically responsible investing and managing God's money and growing money God's way. And that just really made a spark in my life. I started teaching Financial Peace University while I was still an engineer, and finally discovered the path to becoming an advisor. So, really excited to be here. I learned about generous giving this year and went through my first experience with generous giving just a few months ago, and it really made an impact on me. And I thought, man, how amazing would it be if I helped open these conversations up to other people to help them be more generous. So that's why I'm here today. David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, about this, David. I live in North Idaho. It's snowing here and quite cold. I uh, I have been interested and excited in stewardship and generosity as a concept for a long, long time. And my real passion is to uh, help other Christians experience the joy of generosity and help remove any barriers they have to cheerful giving. And so that's why I'm a giving coach. I love sitting with people and learning about their heart, what they're excited about. Um, to be a part of what God's doing in the world in many different ways. And anything that's in the way, sometimes that's a mindset of scarcity. Sometimes it's a lack of clarity around what the organizations are doing with the funds we give them. And sometimes we just feel overwhelmed with the hundreds of good things out there. And we don't take part in any because we don't know which is best. So anyway, that's me and what I'm about, and having these conversations and just open forum and no pressure is great. It's fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks again, David, for being here. I'm really excited. I want to kind of talk about some of the objectives for today. So we have about an hour scheduled for this presentation, so about 15 minutes left. I want to just talk about some of the objectives and kind of our heart behind facilitating these. The first one is that we would excel in the grace of giving. 2 Corinthians 8:7 says, "Just as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in your love for us, see that you also excel in this grace of giving." So our hope here is that you will find ways to excel in the grace of giving. Maybe you're a giver already, but there's a grace that you're looking for. David, you want to take the next one?
Listen to and obey the Lord's prompting for our lives. Proverbs 3, 5 through 6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." It's important for us to pay attention to what God's trying to tell us. This isn't about David or me teaching necessarily. It's about letting the Holy Spirit show up and listening. All of us, I'm
Yeah.
happy to learn here alongside you guys today.
Absolutely. The third one here, the third objective is to develop a vision for sharing the joy of living generously. So Hebrews 10, 24 through 25 says, let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Let us not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. So as we know that generosity has the great impact on changing our hearts, that's what this conversation is about today. We just want to help open up the door to experience what God is sharing in your own heart. And so to start us off, I want to set some of the ground rules here. Obviously, focus on what we're talking about and what the stories that we're going to be sharing with about today. Everything that we talk about is obviously confidential. You kind of refrain from making you statements like you should do this, but just focus on yourself. Like, what is God saying to you, and then just participate. Have that open discussion and open forum. And so, if you've never been part of a journey of generosity or a generous conversation, really what we're here today to do is to hear stories of how generosity has spurred other people in their giving, and then just comment and reflect. What is the Lord saying to me because of that? And so, to start us off, I want to just open up the floor and talk about some of our early memories from our childhood about giving. And for those who are on the call, if you want to share, and I would encourage you, please share. Just type in the box, yes or something, and I will unmute you, and that way we can have you speak. I'm going to share first, just so that we can kind of get the ball rolling. But sharing a memory from before the age of 12 that influenced my view of money or giving. So I remember on Saturday mornings, my mom, she'd wake us up early in the morning before the sun would get up, and before the sun was up, and we would be making hundreds of sandwiches. We would get all the turkey and the cheese and the mayonnaise and put it all together, package them up, and then also before the sun would rise, we would go out to the areas where homeless shelters were before they would open up, and pass out these sandwiches that we had made. And so that really has made an impact on me. Another one that sticks out is um, during Christmas and Thanksgiving seasons, we would go to the homeless shelters on the day of Thanksgiving, and just volunteer our time to pass out food or to help wrap presents or whatever that was. And so, my mom has definitely had a huge impact on my generosity story. So again, if you want to share yours, and I encourage you to, just type in the chat box yes, and I'll make you a presenter, and then you can chat for a little bit. But while we're waiting for others to join, David, do you want to share a story?
Yeah, when I was young, I grew up in relative poverty. It's a relative thing. When American poverty is definitely different than developing nations and the struggles they have. But um, I remember my mom struggling to pay the electric bill, and sharing her concerns and fears with me as a child, and feeling that fear myself. And so I see how that has affected my view of money throughout my life. That sort of thing has given me this mindset of scarcity and fear that God isn't going to provide for me. That's something I've really had to work through over the years. But it's amazing how those memories from when we were kids really stick with us.
Yeah. It is powerful and impactful, and a lot of times, especially when we're younger, those memories stay with us longer because we were so impressionable, especially at that early age. So I appreciate
Right.
that. Appreciate you sharing. So again, if anybody wants to share their money story before they were 12, or their generosity story, just type yes in the chat box, and we'll unmute you. So okay, cool. Now I want to pivot and hear. We're going to hear another person's story, and this one is from Renee. And actually, I'm going to share a video here with y'all so we can watch that, and we'll get that started.
I used to have this idea that I would be free when I was. Well, I don't know. I think there was a time when I thought freedom and control had a lot to do with each other. Somewhere probably around high school, I made a decision that I wanted to go into medicine. I knew I wanted to be a physician. It was a while before I settled on the specialty of obstetrics and gynecology. I drive to work each day really feeling blessed that I have the career I have, that God has given me a job that's a ministry. I feel like I've got the best job in the world. Morning. All of pregnancy is a lesson in patience and a lesson in flexibility. It just teaches me, as I watch women experience that, how important it is to live in the moment. I get to walk with women and families through really, really joyful times and through some really challenging times. You know, I get to experience life from the beginning to the moment a baby takes its first breath. I think the problem for a long while was that my vision of what was freedom was not in line with what God says is freedom. I had a real turning point at 37. It's about 3 years ago. I've been in Austin for 7 years, been in practice as an OB-GYN for 7 years. I had accomplished everything I had set out to accomplish. I had a successful career, I was out of debt, and I just hit a point where I realized that I had all this, and I was not in the content place I imagined that I'd be. It was a really uncomfortable place to be in, to realize that you'd accomplished your goals, and now what? You know, now what's next? And then to feel a sense of just a hole, like an emptiness inside, as if something was missing, and yet not know what that is. As God realigned my values with His values and showed me places where I thought I was free, but I wasn't yet free, that changed everything. Because suddenly there were some areas where I had to take some steps of surrender, imagining that those were going to lead to more restriction and less freedom, only to find the opposite was true. That was in money, that was in relationship. But I didn't really understand yet what true freedom was going to look like. So often when I get home from work, I can't wait to get my shoes on and get out on the trail. When I'm running, I hear really radical things from God, and that's where I go to meet Him. I feel like that's the time when He puts thoughts in my head that are really beyond myself, but that's when I get ideas. I think when I made a decision that it was time to just go all out and live for Christ, that it was time to really discover what it meant to be an offering to Christ, to live my life fully surrendered. It started to get crazy, the things that I would hear. The biggest and most radical thing I've ever heard was, your relationship and your faith are not compatible, and it's time to do something about that. I mean, that was my big breakthrough, was '07. You know, God moved me out of a relationship, convinced me and convicted me that that was not honoring to Him, and it was time to lay that down. The second most frightening thing I've ever heard God say had to do with my finances. You can't go and look at another culture and not do this compare and contrast of like, this is what they have, this is how they live, this is what I have, and this is how I live. There are times when I would just sit in that and it would just break me. And I just realized that it's only by God's grace that I have anything more than they have. It's not because I'm entitled to it or I deserve it. And even if I say, well, yeah, but I earned it or I worked for it, then I would hear in the other ear, but I gave you the ability. I gave you the opportunity. I gave you the talent. I gave you the funding. I gave you the resource. I gave you the education. It's like, what do you have that I haven't given you? I was on a run, and I just in a conversation with Him, just thinking about how might I change in response to what I had just seen, what I had just experienced. I'm just running, and I hear God say, I want you to work like a doctor, and I want you to live like a nurse. So I started thinking, well, sure, I could live on half my salary. And then I started thinking, well, I could live on a quarter of my salary. And I just kind of froze in that and started thinking, well, about a quarter of my salary is probably about what the average nurse is making. I basically just took my salary And I just sectioned it off, and I said, well, this is what a nurse would make, and then the remaining 3/4 is his. And I felt like God said, that's right, that's what you share. I'm not gonna lie, it took some time getting used to living on a budget again. I hadn't really had to stop and think about how I was spending my money for a while. I don't feel like God is only asking me to spend and live within my means, but I think He's also talking to me about how I save. I mean, I've been saving for retirement pretty generously and investing a lot of money. My goals were to retire at 50 and to retire with a certain amount of money, to live at a certain lifestyle. You know, I lost 6 figures in an investment, and at that point, I felt like, you know, I was telling you, that's when I had a lot of peace. And I had a lot of peace because I felt like God was saying, why are you saving so much money? I felt like God wanted me to save to a lesser degree as well, and to be much more generous with my money by sharing it now. When I have a choice about whether to save or whether to share, and I get to bless somebody, often behind the scenes, and see the way that it's impacted their life, and the reality is, it feels right. It's very satisfying. I really live a very full life, a very satisfying life. And I feel like that hole that I had 3 or 4 years ago, that I wondered, what is it and how do I get it filled, has been filled to overflowing. And I feel like it fills me up, and then it pours out to others around me in a way that I hope I bring a lot of joy to people's lives. And that joy I wouldn't have to give if He hadn't first given it to me. So.
That's, man, that's really powerful. I'm gonna share some slides here. What stood out to you? I'll go first. What stood out to me was her willingness to respond to God. She was looking for opportunities. She made space for those opportunities to hear from God and what God was telling her. I think that's what stood out to me this time. What about you, David?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting that she was saving so much for the future, and this is the model, the financial model we're given in America is work hard, save as much as you can for retirement, and it's all based in that fearful mindset that God's not going to take care of me. I have to take care of myself, and she seems to have such a peace, even though she's made this, radical decision to live off a quarter of her income. And that's, I don't know, that peace is attractive. I want that peace, you know?
Yeah, I think, oh, here we have, Scott wants to jump in and share, which is awesome. Hey, Scott.
Hey, David. Hey, David. How are you guys? Thanks for doing this.
Doing well.
Hey, thanks for being here.
joining us.
Yeah, what I think was really great about her story, a lot of things, but she was open to having her values tested against God's values. The line that stood out is realigning her values to match God's. And I think that that's a real threat, to think that we might be off, the things that we value, the way we conduct our lives every day, that they might not be aligning with God's word, even though I think inherently we all know that's true. but to say I'm going to take that risk and I'm actually going to go to God's word, and then I'm willing to make changes. There's a lot of humility that comes from that is bigger than just dollar amounts. And so it seems like that is where we run afoul of God's plan, is that we don't really understand what his values are. So I thought that was really, really, really great. And then, the irony is that she thought that, I guess, God's values would bring more restriction, and they actually brought more freedom. So there's some really beautiful irony in all of that.
I love that. It does take a lot of risk, not just financial risk, but like
Right.
emotion, identity risk to
Correct.
admit, wow, I may have it wrong. I need to go back to God and align myself with him.
Yeah, and especially I think one of the lines she said was something of to the effect of, why, God says, "Why are you saving so much?" Which, I mean, as a financial advisor, this is something I struggle with as well, right? Like, how, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I started facilitating these, to encourage my clients to be more generous, which is in opposition of what most financial advisors will say. They will tell you to save more and then to invest more, and not necessarily to be more generous. And so, yeah, there is a dichotomy here of what the world is saying and what God is saying. So yeah, it's but to her point, she experienced a lot more freedom,
Hmm.
which
Right.
is hard to find, and it was evident on her face, the amount of peace that she had.
Right.
um,
Sure.
Next question here is: if you put yourself in Renee's shoes and think about living below your means in order to give more generously, what goes through your mind? And I think the key word here is intentionality. She was
Mm.
intentional about living on less. Curious to hear y'all's thoughts.
Yeah, she's like, I'm not going to lie. It took some time to figure this out again because living on a doctor's salary, she'd never had to worry about it. And and so you're right. She had to be intentional. It's not just going to happen. You really have to, like, I'll choose to budget, even if God's blessed you with enough to not have to. And that's interesting.
Mm.
Yeah, I think the big thing that comes to mind is she didn't feel entitled, and I think that's the thing that I struggle with, and folks that I am sharing with, that we struggle with, is our lifestyle is really outpacing our generosity, and
Mm.
we
Mm.
definitely feel like that's an entitlement. It's okay because we have more, and because others that's around us seem to have even more. Then why not consume more, as long as I'm giving certain amounts away, as long as I'm doing something, right? As long as I'm
Right.
tithing, or as long as I'm giving whatever level we deem appropriate. But to be challenged by this idea of courageous, intentional um, generosity is really where I think I would love to be. I would love to be a courageous giver.
Mm.
And it does take that. It's fearful for me, I find, to make a big gift. It's exciting. It's thrilling in a way, like a roller coaster. It's scary because I like sometimes choosing to give. Well, I don't know where the next month's money's coming from, but I know I'm going to be faithful with what God gave me today, uh, and it's a scary place to be, but it's exciting too. It's fun to give to wherever God leads you, and see the impact you can have. There's in the exchange often I find I win more when I give than maybe even the recipient, just because of the joy it brings.
Yeah, there's definitely a joy. I think that, I mean, it's like what Jesus said it when he quotes back in Acts. Is it more blessed to give than to receive? I think it is, mainly because of the joy that we get to experience. The third question here is is a curious one. What are the benefits and risks of saving less aggressively? Um, I mean, I know I have my own thoughts on this because um, I was, really primarily part of what is called the financial independence retire early movement, which was not of God, I don't think, because my motivation was not there, was not in Him. My motivation was self dependence and independence from Him. And so I would say, some of the benefits to saving less aggressively might count contradict what the world says, right? The risks, I think, are what people will tell you in the world is that you won't have as much, that you'll never have enough, and that your future you will be upset at the present you. And even that statement that she said she felt God telling her, "Why are you saving so much?" I mean, this is something that I struggle with as well. When I think about, like, what is an appropriate savings rate to have? What is my finish line?
Right, a finish line. It's important to look into that and think about what do I need, and it's not going to be the same for everybody. And I think it's okay to, we get so caught up in trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. And like you were saying, Scott, we look around and see others who have even more than us, and so, well, I must be, I'm fine given what I'm giving. I haven't gotten to his level yet, but um, yeah, I think there's something beautiful about depending on God, and not depending on ourselves and our own strength. Like if I work my butt off, I can make money and provide security for my family. But uh, when I'm giving that away and letting His blessings flow through my fingers instead of stopping with, as if I'm a reservoir,
Mhm.
um, and I'm really depending on Him for what's next. I may not have enough to retire at 50, uh, but I know that God's going to take care of me at 50. You know.
How how do we have conversations around enough without it seeming legalistic or super spiritual to have a lower enough than someone else? How do you guys
Yeah,
advise having these conversations?
it's a great question. I find it's helpful just to have these conversations with those in your life who you trust the most, and um, and get their feedback. Just asking a lot of questions. What do you think? It's so weird in our culture to talk about money, which is, I think, a problem. Um, I think our adversary wants it that way. If it's awkward to talk about money, then these important things will never get discussed. But like I think it is a little relative. I think what God's called you to, and me to, and David to, are going to be different, and recognizing that up front, that's okay. Um, and there's a great website, and they've got a podcast too called the Finish Line Pledge, and they've got a little calculator on there. You can put in your family size and and your income, or your consumption level, really, and it tells you what percentile you're living at, for the whole nation. And it's really just insightful to see. Well, and that's interesting. If I'm living at the 65th percentile, and I want to be at the 75th, I think that's fine. But I want to set a finish line and not go beyond it. So if I get to 76%, I've got more to give, right? Um, so for me and my family, that's kind of where we're at. We've chosen that 75th percentile. I don't. That's not prescriptive by any means, but just one example. You check out that website, and see what you think. I think it's helpful. David, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know if you can see my screen now, but I this is actually from the Finish Line Pledge. I was actually looking at this yesterday, which is why I had it right top of hand. But if you notice the box here, so that they have what's called the Sprint series. That it's very similar. It's free. It's no charge. They just want to help people understand kind of what is enough, but it helps start the conversation. And the if you look at the top right here, us as owners, right, where we're owning everything. Let me zoom in a little bit more. You can see that a little bit better. Can you see that all right?
Yeah.
So us as owners, we give to God kind of at a fixed rate, right? That might be the 10%, like you're talking about, Scott. And then as our income goes up, our living expenses increase, which is very common, right? Lifestyle creep, as it's called. Whereas this kind of finish line mentality of these are my base expenses, and everything else up and over and above that, kind of like what Renee did in her story. She said, this is what I'm living on, a salary of a nurse, and everything else above that is what I'm giving away. And it's kind of and so according to this would be that finish line there. This would be saying I'm living on whatever it is, $50,000 per year, and anything over that, I'm just giving away to God's kingdom, or I'm using it to advance God's kingdom in some way, whether that's acts of generosity, or starting something, starting to fund, or maybe even starting a company or business to help be generous to other people and their employees, and whatever that looks like. Obviously different for everyone, but it's kind of a weird model when you think about it, where your finish line kind of stops.
Right.
And the nature of a finish line is, once you set it, it's kind of settled there. And maybe there's, you know I don't mean to get legalistic, but maybe there's cost of living allowances and things like that. But for the majority, it's you are intentional about setting that finish line, and then everything else over and above that, giving away to His kingdom.
What's nice about that finish line calculator on their website is it updates with inflation, and it's looking at the whole nation. And so it's saying, I want to be at this percentile. That'll change over time, and it'll take inflation into account. Or when we become empty nesters, that's going to change too, because a two-person family doesn't need as much as a five-person family. And so I think that's a helpful way to look at it.
Yeah.
And David, what's the percentiles that you were talking about? Explain that a little bit more.
David, can you pull up that calculator and we can
Yeah,
message
sure.
it?
Yeah.
It's the percentile of income. Like if you're at the 75th percentile, it's taking the entire nation, dividing it by 100, and the person at the 75th level, that's what people are living at, versus the 100th percentile, the richest guy in the nation, or the poverty level, way down in the single digits. And so you can play with it a little bit and see, well, what am I making now? Or what was I making 10 years ago? And where would that have put? And you get a feel for it. And David will pull it up here real quick. So if you would, David,
Yeah.
put how many people you have in your family, David? 3?
3. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if your annual household income was 80,000, it puts you at the 56th percentile, or your lifestyle is more expensive than 56 out of every 100 similar sized families. So yes, it's an interesting way to look at it, and knowing that it updates with inflation and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think something like that is helpful, comparatively speaking, because I've found concept around finish lines seem to make sense to people that when they reach a certain income level, they're like, oh yeah, well, I mean, they know that they can live comfortably, and so then they're more open to it.
Yeah.
But you don't really want to base it necessarily off of affluency, right? I mean, that's not
Right.
the purpose of the finish line. The finish line is really trying to align our values with God's values, and so having that type of comparative analytics seems really, really helpful.
Yeah, I find, and some people, you maybe haven't reached the finish line yet, and so it's like, great, I feel okay to keep striving. And maybe you said it and you realize, wow, I reached that 5 years ago. I think I still want to stick to that, and so we got to dial it back like Renee did.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's an interesting tool. Not the only one, not the only way, of course, but helpful.
I think it opens a conversation for the most part, right? Because you instead of thinking, and to Renee's point, it's harder to go the doctor's salary going back to the nurse's salary. It's easier to say,
Yeah.
I'm at a nurse's salary. Where's my finish line, and where am I going to stop? Because
Right.
You don't let that lifestyle creep in. Going from the doctor back down is a lot harder, because, like she said, there was a struggle there. I have to budget again. I have to live on less than I make again. Like, there's a lot more friction that's there.
Mm-hmm.
Another question here is: have you had an international experience that impacted your view of what God has entrusted to you?
I haven't. I'm not one to travel much, so I've stuck to our United States here. Just I've seen other stories that I've found impactful, but I haven't really lived it.
Yes. So my story. So I was on rockets for a little over 7 years at a company, Raytheon, and I traveled overseas, primarily Israel and Japan and Germany and Guam, and there were a lot of places in those countries where the affluence was on display, and then 5 miles down the road, it was abject poverty, which is kind of a stark difference. I mean, we don't think generally of America being segregated that way, although there are pockets. Um, but it is interesting to see. I wasn't on a missions trip or anything. I was working there, but it was interesting to see kind of when you're walking around and you pull out some money, right? That means what when I pull out maybe $50 US dollars, someone else in that country might be their week's wages or their month's wages, depending on what country we were in. Um, and it is a stark reminder that everything we have belongs to God, and like Renee said, he's the one that gave us the ability to make it, right? Because we might think, and I thought this certainly is like, oh, okay, because it's because I'm such a good engineer, or I'm such a good um, uh, person here that I've created this out of my own doing. But to Renee's point, it's like, well, no, God gave you the wisdom, God gave you the understanding, God gave you the know-how to do that. So yeah,
And the opportunity, in particular, I think, being born and raised in America, I had no control over that, and
Yeah.
and so many aren't, right? And like, wow, I didn't choose this, I didn't make this happen. God gave me this, and it takes a while to come from our typical American, pretty entitled mindset to realize
Mhm.
nothing I have is my own doing. Um, and once we get there, I think it is easier to let go of the tight grip I hold on to the things that he's given me. Like, well, he gave me it for the last 40 years. He's provided for me. I guess I can trust him to provide for me tomorrow too.
Yeah, it's powerful. Last question here is, what do you think contributed to Renee's greater sense of freedom?
I think that there's the pressure's off if you stop striving. Um, and you can, because if you're really trying to reach certain type of let's just say American goals of financial independence, success, whatever adjective you want to put on it, like you constantly not only have to attain it, but you have to maintain it. And you only have so much energy, particularly as you get older. And so if you just take that pressure off, and then you have so much energy to devote to devotion, really, to loving God and loving other people. So it seems like there's a stewardship conversation around your energy, your mental energy, your physical energy that's also tied to this financial piece. And it goes back to the identity question or answer that we talked about earlier. But it seems like because God made you as a whole person, so God just didn't make you as a financial person. He made you as a physical person, as a relational person, as a spiritual, as an emotional person. And so, like, if you can find peace in that area, then every area of your life gets stronger. Whereas if you're constantly striving, those areas of your life are going to be dictated by your pursuit of, let's just say, wealth. And so, it seems like she was able to almost cap the amount of energy that she was putting towards one thing so that she could find freedom in all these different other areas.
That's a really good way to say it.
Yeah.
She capped her energy. That's really impactful. I haven't thought about it that way. Because yeah, when you're striving to excel in your income or your career, you're giving that a lot of energy. And not that you don't want to do a good job, but if that's your sole focus and that's the kind of the pinnacle of where your energy is focused, that's a great point, Scott. Like you will live and die by that energy of, am I getting closer to that, or am I getting pulled further away? That's powerful. What about you, David? What do you think contributed to that?
I think Scott put it really well. Like, just not striving so much in one direction lets you pull back and gives you peace. It's like, where does God really want me to put my resources? Not just money, but time, energy, attention, or our influence. These are so many ways we can give of ourselves, um, and being able to pause and slow down and ask the giver of these gifts, "What do you want me to do with it?" Um, is freeing, I think.
Hmm. Scott, I have a question for you. I mean, in your role, right? How do you see this being played out with the people around you? Like, is this a struggle, or have you? I mean, I know you mentioned like how do you start the conversation about the finish line, but what are the kind of conversations you're having?
Um, yeah, I think that the the main the main challenge is starting the conversation. Um, I live in the religious South, and so people have really strong boxes for a lot of things that have to do with their spiritual lives, and money is the tightest box. And so, and it's interesting the today being Giving Tuesday,
Mm,
and what does it do? It comes at the end of multiple days of consumption. So then, if anything's left over, let's think about giving. It's just ironic because that's exactly the way the culture thinks. And so trying to start a conversation, almost stating the obvious, how do we get out of this condition of being discipled by the culture? How do we return to what God says? And how do we not just put giving in a box, and even just even a tithing box? I mean, sure, it'd be great if everybody tithe as long as their motivation was good. That's not the case. A lot of people that do tithe, their motivation is not great. I think that churches are they wait they settle way too easily for fundraising as opposed to making disciples around generosity. That's just a pet peeve of mine. So I want to talk about how do people stay motivated by their relationship with God to give whatever percentage, whatever amount, and it's all His. So I mean, it's any of it's fair game. And right now I'm a little bit of a disruptor, um, and I people have certain expectations of pastors to be whatever related to money. So I try to use resources like books and whatever I can find to say, hey, I'm not saying this. You go read what this guy says. You read what this guy says. You come back and let's talk about it. And I've found that there's a spirit of openness because most people they realize that while they have more than their parents and they have more most of the time than any generation in the history of the world, they're definitely not flourishing. They're not as happy as they want to be. They're riddled with anxiety. They're frustrated. If they're honest, they'll tell you that they're envious and greedy and coveting. And so, if people will have those kinds of conversations, then you can really get to um, generosity as an antidote to a lot of what ails us. And so, yeah, I'm like chief instigator right now, which is great. It's a great role to be in because I think it's the most important discipleship issue that we face. Um, because I think if this energy question is really important because so much of being spiritually powerful has to do with putting our energy towards loving God and loving others. And if we are constantly pursuing self goals, and then giving out of our leftovers, we're just not, we just don't have a lot. We just don't have a lot. So, I appreciate the question. I'm trying to get people out of their rigid boxes around generosity and convince them that it's not about a percentage and it's not about a dollar amount. It's really about motivation. And if they'll go there with me, then the threat is away is off that I want something from them, and that they really can begin to understand that I want something for them. Other than that, it just sounds like church speak. Does that make sense?
Oh
yeah.
yeah. Have you ever done a Journey of Generosity retreat?
No, haven't. Which is why I wanted to jump on. I've had conversations with different staff members at some events I've been at, but I've never quite figured out how to incorporate that into the culture of our church. Or honestly, I'd really like to do one for our city, and it be a multi church in engagement.
Yeah.
But I know that there's also ways of doing things like this, and there's ways that I could do something similar with our own group. I've used different resources. I love Renee's video. I've used it a couple different times in some classes that I've taught. But trying to get people to share stories similar to Renee's is a real challenge within our church body because I think that would be really motivating. And so I haven't quite gotten over the hump with people in our own body because we have a lot of
I'll put
generous folks.
just what I found is hosting these journeys of generosity and facilitating them. I've done 5 now, and they're, overnight retreats, about 24 hours. I'll get an Airbnb just about an hour out of town, and I send out over 100 invitations. And then I get like 8 people, and that's fine. And the time of sitting down with someone for 24 hours, sharing meals together, this really tends to open people up.
Mm-hmm.
And so showing videos like Renee's and others that are on the Generous Giving website, um, it really gets people thinking. Usually there's a couple people who came because their spouse made them. And there's usually a couple people really excited, and others in between. But yeah, I think I've been searching very similarly to you. How do you get this conversation started? Like, we need to be talking about this stuff. And I agree with you. It's one of the biggest discipleship vacuums in our Christianity as a culture. So I've found that hosting jogs is my best route so far that I've found. And I'm still looking too. I'm going to teach a class at the Christian high school next semester. And I've tried other groups that I'm leading, the Faith Driven Entrepreneur, for example. But the jogs seem to be the most powerful so far. So I recommend, trying to put that together, inviting people that even if they'll just come because they love you, but they don't know what it's all about, right? Get them in the room, and then the Holy Spirit shows up and does his thing. Because really, we can't inspire generosity in people. I think this is a work of God.
Right,
and
absolutely.
so if I space for those conversations, all the better.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have hesitancy when they're with their own kind, right? Oh, that's fine. I don't want to talk about this with my pastor or whoever it is, right? And so there's some hesitancy there. I know.
That's right.
I know Generous Giving has their own facilitators that sometimes they'll send out, facilitate that, so that you don't have to be the one to do that. So
on that note, we did one with our family, my wife's siblings and parents, in last summer, and I had facilitated some already. I felt comfortable to facilitate it, but Generous Giving, a friend of mine who works there, said, you know what, because of family dynamics, you may want to have a third party facilitator. And so he came out to where we were having a family get together, and I'm so glad he did, because I just could tell halfway through it, like, oh, had I facilitated this, it would have been weird. It would have been all about me and the relationship I have with different people. But because it was somebody else, it didn't have to be that way. And that was great.
Yeah, good advice.
That's awesome. Well, I had another video to show the Kat and Eugene story, but I know we're kind of short on time, so kind of just ended here. I don't know if anyone has any more thoughts. Feel free to reach out. This was kind of a taste of a journey of generosity. So if you're watching, or maybe you're watching the recording and you want to learn more about hosting one of these for your own church, reach out to David or myself. Happy to help put you in touch with the right people or help facilitate that for you. And that this is kind of just an opening for the longer version of these, which is a journey of generosity, which is 8-hour, 12-hour overnight retreat, however you want to structure it. But to really get your family, your church, your small group, your Bible study, whatever it is, just talking about generosity in an open forum that's safe, where you feel that there's not going to be any tension, and whether you're a giver or not, whether you're an abundant giver or a small giver, there's no obligation to feel like you have to feel less than or more than others. And so it's a great opportunity. So reach out.
The key is that usually conversations about money end with somebody asking you for something. And there's none of that here. It's just being able to open our Bibles, talk to other Christians, see what does Jesus say about generosity, things like that, with no pressure. It's huge.
Yeah. Well, with that, David, I want to say thanks. Scott, I want to say thank you for joining and hopping on. If we can be resources, reach out to us. Always happy to help. And with that, hope you have the rest of your Giving Tuesday.